A friend of mine purchased the new Zu Audio DWX speakers and was kind enough to let me borrow them to review here on my channel. Now, I paired these speakers with a couple different amplifiers and found something that really made these speakers shine. But before I can tell you about what made these speakers shine, I first need to tell you about how these originally paired with my vintage Pioneer SX980 receiver. Now, before I get started, I have to give a quick shout out to my friend Craig Havigers for allowing me to borrow his piano black DWX speakers. Craig has a YouTube channel that I'll link to below, so please be sure to check that out. He's also starting a hi-fi pop-up group in Nashville that I am sort of helping him out with. So if you're in the Nashville area and want to geek out and nerd out on hi-fi in person with other people rather than here on the internet, we're going to put together this hi-fi group, and there's a Facebook group that we've started, and I'll include a link to that below, so please be sure to check that out as well. Now, the pair of speakers that Craig bought were the base model of the DWX. They're priced at $1,398, and as I mentioned, they're the base model. They don't have any of the extra upgrades that Zu offers online when purchasing the speakers. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I first paired the DWX speakers with my vintage Pioneer SX980 receiver, which comes in at 80 watts per channel. Now, I removed my Emotiva subwoofer from this system because I wanted to hear just how well the DWX speakers reproduce bass without a subwoofer in the system. Now, right away, I was struck with just how thick these speakers sound in the mid-range. Now, I don't mean thick in a bad way. Other words that jump to mind are broad, deep, and hefty. What I mean is every bit of sound that you hope to hear is present. Now, I really like the front ported bass on the DWX speakers because it makes it much easier to place in my system than a traditional bookshelf speaker with rear ported bass. Now, this means that right out of the box, the DWX speakers produced a much better bass sound than my vintage Klipsch heresies. The Zu's bass sound is musical and present. It was perfect for my small listening space. But if you are someone who loves a traditional subwoofer sound in their system, I still think you'll be interested in pairing a subwoofer with the DWX to get that extra bass performance. The DWX tweeter driver really allows musical detail to slip through in the upper frequencies. And the 10-inch full range driver sounds, well, exactly that, very full. It really fills your room with a smooth sound that is very easy to listen to. Now, Zu mentions on their website that these speakers can even help poor recordings sound better in your system. So I found one that I grew up listening to, which is Icky Metal by Archers Aloft, which just has that very lo-fi 90s indie budget sound recording to it. And it can sometimes just have a little bit of a harsh sound in the upper frequencies. And Zu is right. These speakers did do a good job of sort of bringing that harshness down and making it easier to listen to. Now, I have a confession to make. I often find the guitars in the Loveless album by My Bloody Valentine a little bright and sometimes can be hard to listen to all the way through the entire album. But just like with the Archers Aloft record, the Zu speakers did do a good job of just smoothing that sound out and actually made this album a lot easier to listen to, definitely better than any of the other speakers that I've had in my system prior to the DWX. Now, at this point, I really thought the DWX speakers couldn't sound that much better in my system. And then I recalled they actually have a high sensitivity rating of 95 decibels. Now, I love pairing my higher sensitivity Klipsch Heresy speakers with low watt amps. So I pulled out a 6-watt tube amp that I got earlier this year to review from a company in China and paired those with the DWX speakers. And it was at this point that something really crazy happened. My wife even commented on the sound of these speakers. Now, we were listening to streaming music via Tidal, which was going through an iFi Zen Bluetooth streamer into my Shit Saga Plus preamp. We were listening to Uncle Tupelo's No Depression album, and that's when my wife said, "That's weird, I can hear the vocals behind me." Now, this threw me for a loop because she doesn't normally comment on speakers when we're listening to things here at the house. So I decided to ask her a few more questions as to what she meant. And she was able to clarify a little bit better by saying that the sound actually sounded like it was surrounding her, like the music could be heard everywhere all around. And I explained to her that I thought the same thing, and that was due to the excellent deep sound staging of the DWX speakers. So for years, I've been reading about people hearing a 3D holographic sound with a tube amp. And I'll have to say that with all the speakers that I have paired with this 6-watt tube amp, the Zu's definitely provided that most 3D sound. The soundstage was very deep. Like I said, it just surrounded us. It was so impressive. I've just yet to hear that in my system, and pairing these speakers with that 6-watt tube amp really brought that sound to life. Now, we were listening to a lot of different genres when using the DWX speakers, and jazz and acoustic music really stands out with these. But even our favorite rock records, we were hearing things that we had normally never heard listening to them hundreds of times before. And all of these things were brought out so much more with this 6-watt tube amp versus the 80-watt per channel amp with the vintage Pioneer SX980 that I first originally paired with these speakers. Now, a lot of people are going to want to know, was I able to get the music loud enough with the 6-watt tube amp? The answer is yes. Thanks to the high sensitivity rating of 95 decibels with the DWX speakers, I had no problem getting the volume loud enough in my small listening space. But this is something that I also want to point out with the DWX speakers. They still sound really great at a low volume. So even when I had the music turned down with the 6-watt tube amp, it still really shined, and I didn't lose a lot of the detail in the soundstage that I was mentioning earlier just by turning it down. Now, all this is to say, if you are someone who already owns the DWX speakers and have yet to pair them with a low-watt tube amp, I definitely think you should. I really think these would sound great, especially with like that Deckware 2-watt tube amp. I can really only imagine how that would sound after listening to it with this 6-watt tube amp. If you're someone that's interested in buying these speakers, I think pairing them with any amp is going to sound great, but I would also encourage you to maybe save a little bit of room in your budget to also buy a low-watt tube amp. I think it's really going to make the sound of these speakers so much more interesting than just throwing your typical 60, 80, 100-watt amp at them. Now, I only have a couple of gripes with these speakers, and they are no way related to sound. It's all about size. These speakers are bigger than you think. They're definitely bigger than my vintage Klipsch Heresy speakers. And I think that has to do with the increase in height due to that front ported bass. That also means these speakers are heavy. I found them kind of cumbersome to move them around, definitely in and out of the house, trying to find the best listening space. They are not light. And the thing I think that makes me worried when I'm moving them around is that I'm going to damage that full range driver sitting right there on the front. Now, Zu does offer this little guard that comes in shipping that you can use when moving them around, but that leads me to another thought. If you're someone that's got a lot of little kids running around, I don't even know why it has to be a lot. It only takes one kid with dirty peanut butter and jelly hands to walk up and just plop it right there on that full range driver. There's something about the shape of that driver that just makes you want to reach out and touch it at times. And now, Zu doesn't offer grills on any of their speakers, so I'm not surprised that there aren't any here. If you're somebody that's got a lot of traffic going back and forth where you have these speakers set up, I'd be a little concerned that somebody might accidentally bump into that full range driver. Now, one other challenge with these speakers will be finding the perfect speaker stands to go with them. I don't think Zu really makes speakers that have to have stands. They're usually floor standing speakers. And that rear ported bass just adds some height to the speakers that makes it pretty wobbly if you're going to try to put them on traditional speaker stands. I actually did not even attempt that because I knew they'd fall over. Now, a friend of mine actually hand built the stands that I use for my vintage Klipsch Heresy speakers, and those worked out well for this. My friend Craig kind of had to go online. I think he found some on Amazon that looked like this that he was able to put together and get the right height for his listening space. But it's going to be a challenge to find the right pair of speaker stands for these speakers, so keep that in mind when buying the DWX. Now, setting aside those gripes, there's one thing I can confidently tell you in this video about the DWX speakers, and that is I am really going to miss them. I'm so glad that my friend Craig has these for his system at home, and I'm very jealous because I would hold on to these and listen to them for as long as possible if I could. They just brought a great sense of musicality and life to my system here at home. I had fun pairing different amplifiers with it. All of my sources, including turntables, sounded great with these speakers. There just wasn't anything with the sound that I had an issue with. Fans of vintage clip speakers will absolutely love these without any issue, but I think I can easily recommend these to anyone who are looking to fill their music space with an easy, detailed musical sound. Now, as I mentioned in this video, the thing that really made these speakers stand out to me was that 6-watt tube amp that I received for review from a Chinese company earlier this year. Now, it was the first time I owned a low-watt tube amp, and I learned quite a few things when integrating it into my system. If you'd be interested in learning more about that amplifier, you can do so by watching this video here.